Everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stitching Tales. I am Johanna Lundström.
And I am Malena Hjerpe.
And in today's episode, we're going to talk about sewing do's and don'ts, things that we do and things we would never do, or at least we try to never do, right, Malena? So we have both compiled a list of things that we try to keep in mind. So I'm really curious to see, Malena, what is the first point on your list?
I have to check now. Yes, do's, iron, or pressing. I always press along as I sew. That is my if you want to have a crisp finished garments that actually look like it's, bought garment, that ready to wear look, pressing is key. So I always press when as long as I like. Not when it's totally finished, along while I sew, I always press. So that's my first, always do that.
And why do you why do you say that's so important?
It just gives that nice finished look. It's a completely different. It's not just about getting rid of the wrinkles in the fabric, but it's just actually getting the seams to lie flat. And also especially if you sew with jersey knitted fabric, the seams are going to be stretched out while you sew. And also when you have a neckband that has a different length compared to the shell fabric, it's not going to look nice unless you press. And when I say press, a lot of steam and just press it down. Don't iron it back and forward, because then you're going to stretch out the fabric. But just press with steam from the wrong side so you don't get any pressing mark, and use a pressing cloth if you want to be extra secure. So yeah, pressing is my always number one thing that I always do.
Yeah, I think loyal listeners to this podcast know that this is one of your what do you say, käpphäst in English? Your one of your pillar stones that you always come back to, right? Always press while you sew. And I can definitely attest to that. And I'm one of those people that sometimes skip that step. And it's so hard to achieve a good pressing result after you join seams, because you just get less access as well, because it's so hard. For instance, now I'm going to sew a pair of jeans. So if I skip and press every step, it's really hard then to access the crotch area or the yoke area, because so many seams are enclosed. So it's almost impossible to get a nice flat pressing, which is also one of the things, to consider, that it's super hard to press if things aren't flat. And the more you sew, the harder it's going to be, especially those smaller areas, I think.
Yeah. No, so don't wait until the end. Press as you sew. So I basically spend as much time with my iron as I do with my sewing machine, because the more you sew, the more you need to press. So don't skip that step.
Yeah, it's
but
also.
Johanna, what is what is first on your list?
I was just going to say one more thing about the pressing thing. I own a couple of vintage sewing books from Sweden, and I always this book is from the 50s, and this it has a sentence that I always think of you when I read this: is pressing is half the work when you're sewing.
Yeah. It is. I need to frame that. I need to make it you have it on the wall. That's yes.
We're going to try to do a screenshot of this saying in the book or the vintage sewing books. It's a beautiful book. So you asked me one of my first one, and this is a don't, which I don't do, which is that I very rarely overcast or finish the edges of seams that are being enclosed. So for instance, if I'm sewing a waistband, I don't zigzag or serge the edges, because I'm going to fold it in, and oftentimes I will also reinforce it with the interfacing. So there's no risk it's going to fray. I mean, there are definitely exceptions. For instance, if I use a very loosely woven fabric that has a tendency of fraying, then I definitely recommend enclosing everything. Overcasting everything, but otherwise I don't really. It just adds bulk, and it adds time. So a lot of I would say waistband, hemming, for instance, if you're hemming a pair of jeans or a pair of woven, you don't need to overcast the edges, because it's not going to fray. And I stand by this, and I also remember I took a pattern making class many years ago, and the teacher was also very skilled at detail sewing work, and she said the same thing. If the seam is enclosed, you don't need to finish the edges normally. So what's your take on that, Malena? Do you agree with me or don't?
Yeah, no, 100% agree. Like, I know it for a fact, but my feelings, that's what you need to overcast everything. But I know for a fact that you don't. But the time that I usually sew with the woven fabric, they are quite, a little bit looser woven, like linen that are a little bit looser woven. So then it's a good, depending a little bit on where the seam is. Like, if, for example, a waistband, when I also have like elastic inside that are like, the fabric and the elastic is gonna like rub each other when you wear it, and it's a little bit bigger space. Like when you wash it, yeah, I'm gonna overcast in that case. But when I hem the pants, no, I'm not gonna do it, because it's like such a small space. Nothing is gonna happen. But definitely, like for jeans, as you say, it's thick, it's sturdier fabric. You have fusing on top of it. No, absolutely, you don't need to do it then, because it's just gonna create extra thickness to already very thick fabric. So yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, that's very good. And there are always exceptions to the rules. I'm really curious, because I definitely think that this could be a divisive topic. I think some people, as you say, they just, it's more a mental thing, that you like the feeling of having everything. It's like where you say you both wear, in Sweden we have the saying, you wear both suspenders and a belt, so it's like overly secure. And I think that's a similar mindset. And also, of course, and I agree with you, when with those loosely woven linen fabrics and very like thin like voile fabrics, they do tend to fray a lot. So there's definitely exceptions to this don't, but also, as I say, if you use fusible interfacing on a particular area, again, that will prevent the fabric from fraying. So it's just unnecessary to add it. And you also feel you get like an almost a kind of uneven feeling, and I like things to feel like flat and nice as much as possible. So I don't skip that step if you in those examples that we are mentioning here. So, and don't come at us if you skip it when it's the fabric is fraying, because there are definitely exceptions to this don'ts. I just want to make sure that I have made that clear as well.
You can
it's a nice
check that on your fabric as well. Like, just have the raw edge and like pull a little bit at the edge, like see what is happening. If it's fraying really easily, well, yeah, then it might be a good idea to overcast it. But if it doesn't, then there's no need, since it's going to be closed anyway. Like, it's not going to be, visible or anything. So no, it's a good point.
So what's next on your list?
Next on my list, this is actually more of a confession time. I don't do this, but I do not recommend that you do as I say now. It is pre-washing fabrics. I don't do that, like in 90% of the times, and I have my reasons for it. So this is again, like, this is more of a confession that I don't do it. The reason why I sew these days are because either I'm gonna do a photo sample, and then I don't want to wash the fabric, because maybe if I use some viscose or something, like, it's not gonna. The fabric, things happen in the wash, and it's just not gonna look as nice when you washed jersey fabric, viscose fabric for the first time. Unfortunately, they can become these like creases and things like. So then for a photo samples, no, I don't, because I want the fabric to look like the absolute best. So no, then I skip it. And the other reason why I sew is basically because I do fitting samples. It's not for the intention of even be worn. Like, you just try it out once or fit it on the dummy, maybe like a little bit of wearing test, sure. But then it's just like, takes extra time for me to do it. So then I don't. And I mean, when I make product samples, I don't do wearable product samples or prototypes. It could be like half a garment or like just put in one sleeve. So then also like, why would I wash the fabric because it's not going to be worn? And also, if I do make samples that I'm gonna wear, I usually use fabric that I really know. Like I know this quality. I know how it reacts. I know it's not gonna shrink. It's like got certified. Like I know it doesn't have like bad chemicals in it. So then I'm quite secure that I don't need to wash it before. I am very careful the first time I wash it because the color might bleed. So then I'm super careful. Like I make sure that if it's dark, I only do it with other dark colors. So it's not gonna like the color is not gonna bleed or anything. But yeah, that's my don't confession. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is so funny because the next bullet point on my list is I don't pre-wash knits mostly. So
that's so nice to hear.
Yeah, this is a safe space for doing this. So I love that you say that, and I think there's an overemphasis on pre-washing every fabric in the sewing community. It definitely makes sense, and in some situation, for instance, I'm just about to film my sewing course for how to sew jeans, and I have a denim fabric. And I actually pre-washed that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I was a little bit worried about fabric bleeding, so I want to get rid of that. And also, I felt it had kind of like an unpleasant smell, which dyes and chemicals can, So sometimes I don't really like the idea of having that touching my skin, and when I'm working with fabric. So that's one of the reasons I do pre-wash some things, and also I pre-wash fabrics that are very prone to shrinking, for instance linen fabrics and wool fabrics. I always pre-wash, but in terms of knits, for instance, I don't pre-wash cotton knits. I don't pre-wash rayon knits. The only knits I mostly pre-wash is wool knits, and they're kind of maybe loosely knitted fabrics that has a tendency of getting lengthwise getting a bit shorter when you wash it first. But I agree with you. I don't think it's necessary, and also it unfortunately makes cutting so much harder because, just as you say, there is a tendency of especially softer knits to twist a little bit. So you're going to spend so much time trying to iron it out and getting the lines straight, especially if you're cutting a stripe fabric. And it's just, to me, it adds so much more stress and room for error. And I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Malena, I mean, if you buy a fabric from in a store, for instance H&M, those are cut not pre-washed, right? So they will. I mean, it's the same thing, Why?
Yeah. Yeah, and also like some fabric when they are dyed and everything, like they are washed afterwards to get rid of the extra. Like a lot of fabric are already washed as a fabric, and a lot of garments also, like after they are finished, they are washed also to get like that weird look. So it's like it really depends, like different treatment, different. It's really depends.
Yeah. And you're very true. And also, you can see there are a couple of things in when you're buying a fabric. First of all, sometimes it says soft washed and things like that. That means that it has gone through some type of treatment after it was woven and dyed. And secondly, at least in Europe, speaking of harmful chemicals and everything, there's a label called Ökotex, which is a certification that stands for that the end product, and you can also see this in garments as well, that it shouldn't have a level of chemicals that should be harmful. So again, that means that you should hopefully be fairly safe when it comes to handling those fabrics. And yeah, I mean, cotton, for instance, cotton is, yes, it shrinks a little bit, but oftentimes you can just adjust that. When after you wash it, you just stretch out the fabric a little bit lengthwise when you hang it to dry. You're gonna there will be no visible distortion, in my humble opinion, on most knits. And if you're using polyester knits, they won't shrink because they're synthetics. So yeah, don't do it if you feel that this adds such a extra step for you and a lot of hassle, then do as I and Malena do and skip that step, right?
Yeah, and if you are not sure, and especially also again, like I know my fabrics, I know pretty well, like just by the feeling of it, like is this a good quality or not? Like what is gonna happen to it? If it's loosely knitted and woven, especially knits, then things can happen then in the wash. Like then it could actually become a lot wider and shrink a lot on the length. So those like loosely knit, not just like a single jersey or a rib or anything, but like other types of knit constructions, then I would be more careful. Then things could actually happen in the wash. But if you're not sure, like I would rather like cut a quite big square, like 20 by 20 centimeter, I don't know how many inches, 4 by 4 inches or something, and wash that. Because then like, and also like measure it before and then you can measure it after, and then you can see how much, like what is happening and how is the surface looking like. Is it any peeling issues or twisting or like, those kind of things that you will see. But for good quality fabrics, it's like not so much will happen in the wash then.
Yeah, and we should also recommend a section in our book, Fit for Knits, where we talk about this and also what you mentioned there, how you can measure for shrinkage as well to gauge that, so you don't have to pre-wash the entire fabric just to get an idea of how much it will shrink and if it's worth actually tossing the fabric into the washer beforehand. So yeah, that's hopefully we have saved you a little bit of pain now by both confessing that we don't pre-wash everything, even though I know you'll see a lot of instructions saying that, and I definitely bought into that myself beforehand, but now by experience, no, you don't have to.
Yeah, no, I would always say like it depends on the fabric. Like it's not as easy to just say yes or no. It really depends on the fabric. But good, then we are kind of on the same page on that one. Yeah. What is your next thing on the list?
No. Okay, so my next thing is to, if you're doing a new pattern, I understand, and I don't feel this myself doing a sample every time you're trying a new pattern because it's just so much headache. But one thing that I highly, highly recommend, and every time I skip this step, I regret it deeply, and that is to always measure the finished garment and the finished pattern to get an idea of the fit, because you cannot I think we all makes this false assumption that the pattern maker has like intuitively understood exactly how you want this blouse or shirt to fit, for instance. But and also you're seeing it on the model, but of course the model has their own size, and you cannot assume it's going to look the same on you. So that's why I think it's very, very important to check the measurements and then compare them to a similar garment that you already have in your wardrobe to get an idea on how it's going to fit. Because I think one issue is, of course, ease. Ease is such a personal thing. So, sometimes you don't want it to be as oversized. And then you're going to end up, being disappointed. And on the other hand, maybe you had some expectations that this garment would be quite loose-fitting because it looked like that on the model, or you had an idea that it was a loose-fitting garment. But then when you measure it and you see that the finished garment is just like 2 centimeters wider than your hips, you need to start altering things before you cut into your beautiful fabric. So I think we tend to skip this step, and every time I do that, I always regret it because I make so many mistakes of just trusting, the pattern without checking it.
That's a really good thing, because as you say, like the ease is basically the difference between the finished garment compared to your body measurement. So on knitted garments, you usually have less ease, like negative ease. It's tighter compared to your body. And with for example, a shirt, that could be plus 2 centimeter in ease on the chest, like 1 inches, or it could be 20 centimeters ease, like an oversized shirt. And it's really like your personal opinion, your personal taste. What do you like? So that is really a good way of maybe not having to make a sample before. So that's really good. I actually have a little bit similar. I have always on my do to make prototype or a muslin or a sample, but on my I don't do wearable prototypes. Like I try to do as quick as possible prototype, just because I know if I'm gonna spend a lot of time like doing all the finishings, hemmings, and like those kind of things, like I know that I will skip this step then because it's gonna take too much time. So then I rather do a prototype that is like, again, as I said before, like it could just have one sleeve, and it could actually be a really good thing to not sew in the sleeve on the other side and just like cut away the seam allowance. Because then you can actually see the fit with a sleeve and without a sleeve and see if there are some armhole fitting issues. Is it because of the sleeve or is it actually because of the armhole? That is so much easier to judge when you don't have like, well, finished the sleeve already. And yeah, I never do hems or anything like that on a prototype. I just like basically cut away the hem and just have raw edges because I just need to see like how the length is. So and also like, well, when I make prototype for a pair of pants and I know that the length is good, I just want to see like the crotch area because I did some adjustments. Then I basically cut away like the legs and just do a pair of hot pants or shorts or like a short length because I don't need to see the length. I don't need to waste that fabric. Then I just want to see the crotch area. So yeah, I always recommend to do a prototype, but do is as simple as possible. And as you say, like that was also like the perfect way to measure and just give like a first idea and compare it to your garments in your wardrobe. Like it's like a great base. How do you say? Like you have some base reference, like something to refer it to.
Yeah.
So yeah, and here's like do what you are comfortable with and what's easiest for you.
Yeah, I very much agree. I do the same thing. Because sample sewing is not my favorite thing. It's just a lot of fiddly stuff. You know, you have to like redraft and do changes and cut the fabric again. So anything that minimize that experience and makes it as fast as possible, I'm totally with you. And I do the same thing. For instance, now that I'm fitting a new jeans pattern, I just sew it every sample to the just above the knee. So it's basically like a Bermuda shorts. I don't bother with the length as well. It's also, you print out so much paper, and if you're drafting yourself, it's just a waste of paper as well, and not just fabric, having to do several samples, because as some garment will require more than one sample before you get it right. So yeah, do whatever you know makes it easier for you. I totally agree. I know some people like to do wearable samples, but to me that then you already have done a lot of the process. So to me it's more like a final check, and then I personally rather do it in a nice fabric. I don't have any wearable samples. I either throw them away, or I guess it's wasteful in a way, but honestly it's so, yeah, it's difficult when you put so much effort into something and then realizing, you know, the fit was off.
Yeah, and I was like, I think a lot about that, as you say, with the wasting. Either you waste time or you waste fabric, or like what is, for me, time is so valuable. And I can't waste time on doing a lot of finishes that is not necessary. And like for you, if you want to sew a wearable muslin garment or prototype, I mean, it could also be for the practice of sewing all the details. And like that is completely like, that is a different thing. Like, yes, good thing if you want to practice all the technical steps, go for it. Now we are just talking about getting the fit right. And that's what we are most focused on. And we talk about this in the garment industry a lot as well, like how can we reduce the amount of samples? And yeah, I really agree that that's a great discussion and we really need to be better on that. But I rather, using air quotes now, waste a couple of extra samples to get the fit, design, everything absolutely right, than have an order on 100,000 garments that are iffy, that people maybe not even gonna buy, or they buy it, wear it twice, and I was like, but this is uncomfortable, I'm not gonna wear it again. Like that is wasteful. Like that, the whole order is now not good enough, that is, yeah, I rather than had made a couple of extra samples, securing that, yes, this is as good as it gets. Then I feel more comfortable, like a little bit waste to secure the big picture.
Yeah, you bring out a really good point. That puts some in perspective, especially when you're dealing with those massive numbers of orders. If you're a big fashion brand, and I guess it could be translated even to us home sewists as well. That if you like a pattern, you will probably redo it several times. At least that's my habit. If I find something that I really like, I tend to just reuse that because I put a lot of effort into the fitting and stuff like that. So if you nail the fit, it's gonna pay off in dividends, and also you will wear it as well. I mean, there's something to be said about that as well. That making a garment and then not really liking it because something was a bit off, and unfortunately that can happen. I mean, sometimes things doesn't really work out the way you hoped, and then you might. Most of us, we want to feel good in our clothes, so there's always that risk you run into that you might not. It might feel a little bit snug or it just doesn't feel right. And yeah, so it's always a tricky question. I guess with better like 3D modeling tools, I guess we could minimize some of these, the waste that we are addressing right now. And I thought about this too now that I'm doing my jean sample, because I think I'm going to print my final version, and this is the fourth iteration. So yeah, it has taken quite a few meters of sample fabrics and paper to get the fit right, and of course I feel like, oh no, now I can't wear these like raw shorts, denim shorts. I mean, it doesn't work, and I definitely thought about it. But on the other hand, I know that this when I finish this new pattern for the jeans, I will be able to use this for years and years and years. Of course, in my body change, I might need to do some alterations, but I know it's a working pattern. So I have several of these like base patterns that I keep reusing year over year. So hopefully it was worth the way, so to speak.
Yeah, no, it's like see it as investment instead, like investment in time and in fabric to actually making the final garment as good as it gets. So yeah. Which brings me a little bit to my next do's. I always, not always, but like I don't encourage people to just buy fabric for the sake of buying fabric or because it's on sale. Like you should always buy, like if you really love something. But I always, if I see some fabric, the really good bargain, really good sale, and I feel like the quality, like this is something that I usually sew or like similar or something, I always buy it and put it in the prototype stash. So I have like a lot of extra fabric that I can, so to say, waste on prototypes because it's so, I mean, to cut in those expensive fabrics, like, oof, that is that is painful. So then it's like so nice to have these like cheap fabrics that are maybe some really weird color that I would never wear. But then it's like, I don't feel like I'm, again, like wasting money or fabric because it's they were so ugly that no one else has bought them in store and they were on crazy sale. So yeah, those have a little stash of so to say ugly fabric.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Using.
Yeah, and I think at least here in Sweden, most fabric stores always have this bin with scraps that usually have enough length to do like a sample at least. So you can usually get that. That's an option. And sometimes I buy like all ugly fabric secondhand, woven fabric. I can use that as well. So there are lots of options. Of course, also, if you're doing, you can save. I mean, usually you might end up with having a bit more fabric. That's the case now. For the jean sample, I didn't buy like new denim, but I have some enough length left for previous denim projects that I saved. So I was able to, because it's too small to make a pair of jeans and another pair of jeans, but I was able to sew 3 of the samples using scraps from previous denim projects. So in that sense, it wouldn't have been to great use otherwise anyways, I think.
Yeah, that's a good, like, you save all the scraps, like, kind of ish big, fabric scraps, because they are perfect then if you want to sew prototypes or details or just try out and get experience in your hands on different techniques. So yeah, it's a good. That's why like my my fabric stash is like it's not pretty. It's not pretty at all. Like 20% is like, okay, so these are my fancy fabric that I like, that I love, that, you know, the colors are great and the print is lovely. And all the others are like, yeah, these are for prototypes. Don't look at them. It's just not pretty. It's like such a mismatch of colors and like, I'm not such a colorful person, to be honest. So like, it gives me a little bit like, oh wow, can't really look at my stash.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And also, it's funny when you do the samples, it kind of feels better to use an ugly fabric. Do you agree with me that if you have something that is a sample fabric but it's a little bit pretty, because it just because if you know it doesn't work out, it doesn't really matter because you cut it into a fabric you would never wear on a garment. I have this horrible orange striped fabric that I bought in a sample bin now. It's a knit that I'm going to use for sewing patterns development, and it's such a bright orange. It's like this high visibility, so I could never see myself, you know, wearing like an orange striped tees. I mean, it's you know, it's a glow in the dark orange, but I know that it's the perfect sample fabric to use.
I also have a lot of quite thick rib fabrics or rib knits. Not like you use for cuffs, but actually like you use for like a garment. So I'm like, should I make a pattern for a ribbed fabric just to use these fabrics for samples? Like that's how my design process is going. Like I have these fabrics. Like what can what garments would they be suitable for? I never get around to do it, but you know, it's in the back of my mind. A little bit different inspiration, you know.
Yeah, not that pretty mood board. It's more like, yeah, this was a very fascinating. It took us a really interesting detour here, right? So, as again, if you have some do's and don'ts and want to chime in on discussion here, please drop us a note on our Instagram account, Stitching Tales Pod, or on YouTube, Stitching Tales Pod, where you can comment on every episode. Is it my turn now? I think I have a few more things on the list.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
one things that I never I guess I say you don't. I don't use cheap thread with a few exceptions, which I'm just going to address. But there's a massive difference, in my humble opinion, between those cheap rolls of thread. Sometimes you can get like a bin with the 10 different colors and it costs like nothing, you know, in those like dollar bins you can find maybe in grocery stores and things like that. Those threads, they will break extremely easily. So, but if you buy a good brand, say for instance Gutermann or Coats or similar type of brands, they tend to stand the test of time. They're very durable, and you can definitely test the thread by pulling it. And if it cracks really easily, you know there's a big risk that that's what's going to happen when the garment is worn and put under a lot of stress. So, but I do have a few exceptions to that. For instance, as I mentioned, now I'm sewing jean samples. I do sometimes cheap thread ends up in my stash. I have no idea, because even though I don't, you know, it just happens. And
magically appears,
right? It jumps in through the basket when I'm going through those dollar bins. But I do have a few of those, and these I always use for samples because I don't want to waste, because good thread is quite expensive, and we sew a lot of samples, you know, those tiny spools tend to run out quite fast. So I always use this kind of almost disintegrated cheap thread in large spools for samples. So there's definitely use of it, but use it wisely, and also remember that sometimes thread age as well, so it can break. So that's something I definitely never save on if I'm doing a garment that I actually plan to wear, to use cheap thread.
That's a really good recommendation. And usually also if you have difficulties with your sewing machine, like thread tension, like it keeps on breaking. I've had, for example, when I used bad thread, like the upper thread is like eventually like it's how can I say it, torn down, like it breaks because like
friction,
the needle
right?
and the Yeah, exactly.
The friction.
Like it's not a good match between the needle and the thread. So it might then is like it's the thread that is just not good enough. So if you have a lot of issues with your sewing machine, it might actually be like try it with a different thread and like a good quality thread, and it might the problem might disappear.
It's very true, and also sometimes it's very like flossy, so it almost like feels like, and that can also affect the sewing and the tension and everything like that. So the stitches won't form as beautifully because the thread, as you say, it doesn't run smoothly. It kind of gets stuck, and you almost get some lint from it. If it tends to almost like pill. So it's definitely a huge difference between cheap and expensive thread. So skip that dollar bin unless you want to use it for samples. That's a good tip, I think.
Yes, I totally agree.
All right, then, Malena.
Yeah, mine here. I want to hear your opinion about it, because I have a strict. I always do this. I know that it's a little bit unnecessary, but I always do this. And this is when I cut out the pattern pieces from the fabric. I always have them in the same direction, like always. How do you say? I have an up and down on the fabric, and I mean you can decide if it's like just like how do you say, not a print or anything. Like I decide what is up and what is down, but I always place like, everything that, like the sleeve, the front and back bodies, like they should always have the same direction. And I mean, on a solid color, it doesn't really matter. They do this like in the sewing industry. They also like flip to get the maximized out of the fabric. But I have like I need to cut them in the same direction. I don't know, like the color shading might be a little bit different. I mean, if you have like a nap fabric, like a Manchester or like a velvet, like this is like actually solid, like you have to have the same fabric direction, and like it's a must. Otherwise you are gonna get different color shades if you turn it like one piece upside down. But I have to do it on like regular fabric as well. Is it just like me, or is this a valid point?
Oh, that's so interesting, because I'm definitely of the one flipping. Sorry.
Yeah, and I know that it's like on linen woven, then I might actually like, okay, I can break my own rules now. But on other fabric, I have to have the same direction. And yeah, I'm a little bit scared. Like if you wash it, for example, then the colors might, like, I don't know. It's, yeah. When I hear myself talking, I feel like, okay, this is maybe a little bit OCD, like, just let it go.
Yeah, I used to be the same way, but then I saw, all these like videos and documentation from the garment industry, and I could see that they were totally, always trying to maximize, the less amount of fabric. And I thought about this, because sometimes you have to add so much extra length to the fabric to do what you're saying, especially if the fabric is a little bit more narrow. So in my opinion, if it's good enough for the garment industry, it's good enough for me. So I'm just, of course, as you say, velvet, all the nap fabrics should definitely be cut in one direction. Of course, prints that has a particular formation, there's always a right and a wrong. I do think that you have a point that if you looked at really close and in good lights, you might see a slight variation. I think I've had this happen a couple of times. So, just how the woven or the formation or the dye, as you say, there could be a subtle difference. But to me, I've never really had. I can't think of one situation where this was actually a real issue. So honestly, I don't think you have to, as you can do just do you, Malena. This is a safe space to do. We're not subscribing to like you have to do this or you should never do that, because we're definitely just sharing our own thoughts and some habits that we have. They are definitely not rules, but I don't agree with you, but I totally understand where you come from. I should say that.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that I'm like, I don't have to do this, but it's just like I need to do it. If it's like a security blanket. Like if I cut them all in the same direction, I know that it's gonna be like, yeah, it's gonna be good. Like it's not gonna be an issue. So it's just like a safe thing for me. And I also do. This is actually a valid point. When I sew, and we talk about this also a lot in our Fit for Knit books. When you sew, I always try to sew in the same direction, because then, I mean, the seams are stretching out the fabric a little bit, and if you sew it in different direction, it's gonna be it might be a little bit twisted and stretch in different directions. The only exception is like when I sew the shoulders, then I sew, because I have reinforcement, then it's just easier to sew it the same direction, but it's like such a short distance. But otherwise, like side seam to the sleeve, I always like make sure to think about the sewing direction, so I do it like symmetrical. So that I think is a valid point.
Yeah,
that I know that the other one is like, no, maybe you don't need to cut everything in the same direction.
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear what's your take on this, everyone who's listening to this episode, because I definitely can see both points being valid. But yeah, and I also agree with you about the sewing direction. I do the same thing. You should definitely be mindful of that, because there is always a little bit of sliding happening. And it just, as you say, it's just a tiny, it's so annoying, especially if you end up, and also if both pieces are shifting, at least they are both shifting in the same direction. So if you, for instance, if you're sewing a pair of pants, if you start one side seam at the waist and then go down to the hem, and then you do the other side seam with the hem going up to the waist, if there is a difference in length, right? Because sometimes that happens because you cut a little bit wrong or whatever, then you're going to have, the shifted in totally different directions. So you will end up 1 centimeter stretched out at the bottom of one hem and then 1 centimeter waist. So everything's going to be quite off. So that's just that particular is why I always sew in the same direction if I can. As you say, shoulders is a different thing, but as you say, all the side seams and everything, I very much agree with you.
And especially with pants, like the side, I do so like from top to the bottom on both, like all leg seams. Because if you then sew one leg on like the other direction, it might stretch a little bit. So I do think it's a good thing to be mindful of that.
Yeah. Speaking of OCD, I have one of those things as well, and that is when I sew, it becomes quite messy very fast. But I can't start a new project with a messy sewing desk, so I have to do like a deep clean of everything, because I cannot for my life get motivated to start sewing if I can't access everything easily and freely, and everything feels like nice and well set up, and so I have everything like arranged in a nice order. I mean, chaos will happen. It's not a pretty thing to sew. I think we all know how your sewing space is going to look after a while, but I just have to have a clean space in order to feel motivated to sew when I start a new project.
That is such a good habit. Like, do that. Don't do my thing. Like, I actually have it like, I don't clean as I go. I'm like such a messy cleaner. No, such a messy sewer. And it's like things everywhere. And then when it's like, okay, but now I need to do like the next thing because it's a work thing. So then I just like scooch everything over on my cutting table. So like, okay, now I got a little bit space for this new next thing. And then like scooch that one over again. And it's like, yeah, it's not a good, I don't do it, but don't do as I do. Do as Johanna do. It's, and then you're like, okay, now I need to clean the sewing space. But like, no, I don't want to. It's horrible.
Yeah, I wonder, because my sewing, I do have 3 sewing machines, even though I have a nice table, it's not that huge. I can imagine that even if you had like the largest sewing table in the world, it's a big, you would still end up with a mess. Because I think that's just how it is. It's almost impossible because you have so many notions and fabrics and scraps and all that kind of stuff and different like threads or you have usually, maybe you have at least 2 sewing machines set up as well. You maybe your serger and your sewing machine. So it's funny sometimes when you see those stage photos, Pinterest stuff of people sewing, and they're like, it's like that is so. I'm like, this is so unreal. This is like nothing. Nobody. No one's space looks like that. So sewing is not like a dreamy, pretty thing. It's like baking. You know, it's going to be stuff all over the kitchen. It's the same thing when it comes to sewing. And then of course sometimes,
100%.
yeah, and of course we all take pictures right after cleaning. So don't be fooled. Just want to say that, full disclosure.
Yeah, no, I wish I were one of those. Like, I really, really wish I was one of those who actually had to clean whenever they are finished. But I'm not. But I wish. It's. I mean, it's so much nicer when you have things organized and you find things and not. I have like a creative chaos when like everything is visible, you know. But, you know, everything is everywhere instead. So, but I usually have good, quite visual memories. I like to remember where it was. But yeah, it's not a good system.
Yeah, it's amazing how many things that can disappear, you know, in a small space. It's amazing, you know. You had a pair of scissors and you're like, where are they? But also you get in the flow, so it makes sense, of course. So Malena, do you have any more things on your list?
Well, my last thing is always like, do this. Always test your sewing machine tension. Like, always sew a little test to see that all the settings are good, both on your overlocker, regular sewing machine, coverlock, whatever. Always do a test in the right fabric, in the right amount of layers that you are gonna sew. So this is something that I recommend and that I actually do. So always do a sewing test.
Yeah, great point. I do the same, and every time I skip it, I always regret it, because every fabric will, as well, stitch lengths as well. There's no like one number fits all. It depends on the fabric thickness and everything like that. So you just make sure that it's your desired result on a fabric scrap that you're going to use for the project. It just, yeah, I totally agree with you. It's such a quick way to minimize the risk for mistakes and other things to happen. I totally agree with you. And I have one final thing, and that is, this is more like a note to self, because I don't do this, but I keep saying I should, as that is to not keep on sewing late into the night for hours and hours and hours without stopping, without drinking, without eating, without resting, because it's an absolute recipe for disaster. And still, despite the fact that I've been sewing for 40 years, I have not been able to kick this bad habit. And I had this just the other day. I was, in the studio at 9 o'clock, and I was just spinning circles, basically, not doing anything productive. And if I had just cut that time in half, instead of being here to over 9 o'clock in the sewing studio, I would have been so much more effective with my time. So honestly, I think it's going to be a lifelong struggle for me. It's definitely not helpful. I mean, yeah, of course you want to finish, right? But, you know, you're only going to end up ripping or just being frustrated because your mind is not there anymore.
I think a lot of people can relate to that one. Right? Like, yeah, I agree. You just want to finish, and it's just one last thing. Except for the hem. The hem apparently takes several weeks to finish. I don't know how that is. But everything except for the hem, like, you just want to finish that one last thing, and one last thing more, and one more step. So yeah, 100%. I recognize that feeling, that thought, and yes, will I learn? No.
Oh, never. So yeah, but hopefully some of you have a better habit around your sewing skills. But of course, it's a good thing to be able to focus, of course, as well. It's a skill, but it can definitely be detrimental as well. This was a really fun episode, and I hopefully this gave you all listeners food for thought here, and we would love to hear your do's and don'ts, and if you agree with me or us, or if you disagree with us, please drop us a note. And thank you so much for listening. I am Johanna Lundström.
I am Malena Hjerpe. Bye bye.
Bye bye.